Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and with heavy rainfall across the country, a lot of cattle have been housed in the past fortnight. On this week's episode, I'm joined by Natascha Meunier for Animal Health Ireland to find out what we should be treating for in the coming weeks, when to dose and which products to use. Natascha, you're very welcome. What are the key parasites that farmers should keep in mind this winter?
As you mentioned, we've had quite a warm, wet autumn, and that's definitely going to be a problem with your worms, perhaps some lungworm on certain farms, your liver fluke, and then always at housing, once the animals start to come together, they're in a nice, warm, humid environment, and lice and mites can become a problem again. So that's what we'll be looking at to be treating.
What products and when should cattle be treated for worms then, Natascha?
So if we're looking at worms, they usually will need a treatment around about housing, and this will depend what they've had leading up to housing. So ideally, what you want to use is either a clear drench or a white drench, and this is because of a specific worm called osteichthysia that has a life cycle stage that can become dormant, and so those products work against that, and so that's what you want to be treating now. But if for example, in the weeks leading up to housing, maybe the animals received an ivermectin or something, they might still be covered then leading up to housing itself.
That's great. And I suppose for product to be used for fluke, you mentioned there, what products should be used for fluke and when should cattle be treated for fluke?
So fluke is a little bit different, a little bit trickier, just because there's a longer life cycle when it comes to fluke. And we have three main types of products for fluke, and they affect different life stages of the fluke, the liver fluke itself. So there's some products only work against adult fluke, some work against what they call the late immature stages, and there's a specific product, the active ingredient is triclobendazole, and that works against the early immature stages. So if we're looking at triclobendazole, then it'll kill all the fluke, even at the early life stages, so that you can use that within the first few weeks of housing. If you use a product in the first few weeks of housing that only is effective against adult fluke, you might need to repeat the dose then later in the season. Particularly, for example, if you look at your factory reports, if you're slaughtering animals from last year, if they're still having fluke after the housing season, maybe there's some tweaks or adjustments that need to be made just with the timing of these fluke doses, because the products that work against the adults, if you give that too early on, then there might be some immature worms that still develop. Now, which one you use, I think it's best to speak to your vet or your advisor, just because if there's a heavy problem of liver fluke on the farm, you don't want to be waiting too late to be treating into the housing season either. You know, the liver fluke, they're migrating to the liver, they're causing damage in these animals, and that can set them back a bit. So for some farms, it might be better to treat twice or to treat earlier in the season, even so in some farms, even before housing.
I think it's important what you're saying there, Natascha, in relation to the product that's being used. And really, farmers, when they check the beef health check report, it could be early next spring before they realise the incorrect product was used when the animals were slaughtered and it shows up that fluke are present.
Yeah, so that's almost a little bit late. So we can then only, you can look at last year's to do something about this year, but it's almost a bit late. So what you can also do is take dung samples, and I think many farmers will be familiar with, say, the BEEP scheme, where you would sampling over the summer months to look for liver fluke. You can do the same thing at housing, say about 6 weeks after the last treatment, just to make sure that those fluke have all been killed and they aren't producing any more worm eggs, and they might need a second dose. So just to catch them a little bit earlier than say the factory reports, which is a bit late.
In relation to the BEEP that you mentioned there, we've covered liver fluke, but if it had showed up positive for rumen fluke, should farmers be concerned, or what action should they take?
Yeah, so the BBS was looking at liver fluke and at rumen fluke, and that's what they're detecting then on the dung samples. And there's a few just cautions to how to interpret those results. When it comes to rumen fluke, a large number of farms are affected by rumen fluke, but it tends for the most part that the animals themselves do not become clinically ill. They seem to cope fairly well. So often by the time that you see eggs, there doesn't need to be a treatment. Those animals are coping. If it's not associated with clinical signs, and those are things like scour or a lack of thrive, they usually don't need treatment for rumen fluke specifically. With those results as well, just because of the timing of those, just as a warning, is that if they are negative for liver fluke, it could be a case that there's still liver fluke on farm. It's just that you might have missed it at that early in the season. Later in winter is perhaps a good time just to follow up with another sample, just to check if there is liver fluke on farm.
And you mentioned earlier in relation to lice, what products or what should farmers be treating for when it comes to treating lice?
Yeah, so lice is, as I mentioned, is now becoming a problem as the animals are closer together. When you're treating, just make sure you're treating the whole group. So basically all animals that can come in contact with one another. The lice itself, there's two types. There's biting lice and there's sucking lice. And the biting lice are surface feeders. They tend to stay on the skin, they eat dead skin and so on. And the sucking lice dig a little bit deeper and get to the fluid. So if you're using an injectable product, so say like an injectable ivermectin, on lice, it doesn't always work as well for your biting lice that are those surface feeders, because they don't get into contact with that active ingredient. So in that case, you want to be using a pour-on or a spot-on, or one of those topical kind of products. And you might, depending on how bad a case you have on the farm, you might need to repeat the treatment. The drugs that are used, they aren't effective against the eggs at all. And so 3 to 4 weeks later, as those eggs hatch and develop, you might see that you've got another lice problem, but it's actually just those eggs that have hatched out. So it's important to treat the whole group, and you might need a repeat treatment for those.
Very good. And for farmers that are purchasing in cattle at this time of year, how would their health plan differ?
So essentially, when you're buying in, unless you know the farm well, where you're buying from, you're not 100% sure what you're bringing onto your farm. They might already be sick. Transporting animals is stressful for them. So in the first couple of days to weeks, you want to keep a close eye on them as well, just so that they don't develop any clinical signs. Ideally, if you have the facilities, keep those animals separate from your main group. Give them a worm and fluke dose. Make sure that they're vaccinated. Ideally, you want to keep them separate for a number of weeks, just while they're developing immunity from those vaccines before you mix them with the group.
In the couple of weeks post-housing, what do you advise from an animal health point of view, Natascha?
I guess what you would be doing at this stage, depending on what the treatment plan and the vaccination plan looks like on your farm, you would just be reviewing it, making sure that you've covered all the doses that are needed, the vaccines that are needed, and then there's definitely you're bringing the animals closer together. It's more stressful for them. You want to make sure that they don't develop any kind of clinical signs, any coughing or anything, the first signs of a pneumonia. You want to make sure that there's enough space for them to lie down, to access the feed. Are the drinkers working correctly? Is there fresh water? Are the troughs clean? And then, are the animals, have you grouped them in a similar size? Is there any kind of bullying going on? You might need to make a few adjustments then, just in those first few weeks, to keep the animals happy.
As part of the Animal Health Ireland analysis of the beef health check report, what did you find?
Yeah, so the beef health check is looking at liver fluke, pneumonia, and liver abscesses then at slaughter. And the reason we just stress, how important it is to keep the animals healthy is that even though they might not be clinically ill, there might be something, that they don't perform as well. So what we found, just as a first look when we're studying these results from the factory, is that, for example, those animals that had liver fluke, heifers and steers, they were older by about 33 days than those that didn't have. So those animals are probably being set back because of this. When it came to pneumonia, they were about 12 days older if they had pneumonia compared to those that didn't. So you want to be keeping these animals healthy, and for the most part, this is preventative. For pneumonias, it's things like vaccines. For liver fluke, it's just dosing to make sure that they're being dosed appropriately early in the season. With worms and fluke, we have this opportunity at housing is they can't get reinfected while they're in the shed, and so you want to treat effectively early in the season to prevent any performance losses as the housing progresses.
Natascha, for farmers interested in accessing their beef health check report, how can they find it?
So the beef health check reports, there's a certain number. There's 17 factories that are participating in Ireland, and what farmers can do is they either given the report with any batch of animals that they send to slaughter, but they can access all of their historical results on ICBF under the health tab. There is something specifically for the beef health check, and they can have a look for all the animals that they've sent to slaughter. So they can go back and look, for example. February, March, April this year, were animals that were sent through to slaughter, did any of them have liver fluke? And they can then tweak their dosing accordingly as over the season.
Finally, Natascha, the withdrawal periods for any of the products that we've outlined during the discussion are really important when farmers come to select the herd health plan for the coming winter.
Yes, exactly. So you just want to be really careful. Just make sure you read the labels of any of the products. Even if you've used those products before, just double check. Sometimes they change. So your finishing animals, it's really important that they don't go to slaughter still within that time period of the withdrawal periods.
That's great. Thanks very much. Some great advice there, Natascha.
Thanks so much.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Natascha for joining me on the show. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.